attend and support him in the way that he supports those religious groups all around the world on a regular basis.
So we now just let people who are leaving. Before the statement, I wish to make a short statement about the sub judice resolution. I've been advised that the relevant active legal proceedings in the Court of Appeal. I'm exercising my discretion given to the Chair in respect of matters of sub judice to allow reference to these proceedings, as they may concern issues of national importance. However, I urge members to exercise caution in what they say and to avoid referring in detail to cases that remain before the Court of Appeal. I now call Minister Scully for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'll make a statement on the latest steps that the Government is taking to ensure that swift and fair compensation is made available to postmasters impacted by the Horizon IT scandal. The House is well aware of the terrible impact felt by many postmasters affected by issues with the Post Office's Horizon IT system, which began over 20 years ago. Those distressing consequences have been widely documented both in the courts, in the 2019 group litigation order judgments and in the more recent Court of Appeal judgments, as well as in the media. I've met postmasters personally to hear how their lives and the lives of their families have been affected by these events, and every time I'm moved by the impact that these events have had on individual postmasters' lives and their fight for justice over a number of years. And I'd like to pay tribute to colleagues on both sides of the House for the way that they have supported postmasters in their efforts to expose the truth and see justice done. Today, I'd like to take the opportunity to update the House on the latest steps that the Government is taking to ensure that fair compensation is paid to people impacted by the scandal. Now, as you all know, the members of the GLO performed a great public service by bringing the case in 2019, which exposed the scandal. And that's why I was pleased that the Chancellor announced in March this year that further funding is being made available to ensure that they receive similar levels of compensation to that which is available to their non-GLO peers. Now, today I can update the House that the Government intends to make an interim payment of compensation to eligible members of the GLO who are not already covered by other compensation support, and that's totalling £19.5 million. Together with a share of the December 2019 settlement that we understand was distributed to the GLO postmasters, this brings the total of compensation to around £30 million. Postmasters will be contacted in the coming weeks to submit an application, after which we aim to distribute the funds within a few weeks of receiving that application. And I hope that will go some way in helping many postmasters who have and still are facing hardships. But in parallel, we'll continue to work at pace on delivering the final compensation scheme for the GLO. And I can confirm that we will be appointing Freeths to access the data and methodology that they developed in relation to the distribution of the 2019 settlement. Freeths represented the GLO claimants and have vital knowledge and expertise based on their involvement in that case. And this will allow us to work at pace on the design of a scheme with the JFSA and Freeths to give those in the GLO similar compensation to their non-GLO peers. As promised in March, we will informally consult with members of the GLO about the proposed scheme's operation. And I'm also pleased to announce that members of the GLO group will be able to claim reasonable legal fees as part of participating in the compensation scheme. And I hope that will allay any concerns that they may have about meeting the costs of seeking legal advice and support when applying to the scheme. Turning now to progress on compensation for overturned criminal convictions, I'm pleased to report to the House that interim payments are progressing well. As of 29th of June, there have been 75 overturned convictions, with the most recent convictions being overturned just in recent weeks. And the Post Office has received 74 applications for interim payments, including several new applications recently. 67 offers have been accepted by and paid out to claimants, totalling nearly £7 million. This marks significant progress, with 10 additional interim payments made to postmasters since I updated the Bays Select Committee on the 11th of January 2022. And I'm pleased that these interim payments have helped to deliver an early down payment on the compensation due to affected postmasters in advance of full and final compensation packages being agreed. Now, for those postmasters with an overturned conviction who have already submitted quantified claims, I can share that we are working with Post Office to agree part payment of agreed elements of claims, such as loss of earnings, wherever possible, and will continue to do so with additional claims when they're submitted. Now, taking this step, should enable us to avoid undue delays by awarding partial compensation while the outstanding matters are resolved. But I acknowledge that one area where it's been challenging to agree compensation is non-pecuniary damages, some of which reflect the wider impact on postmasters' lives that these wrongful convictions have had. That includes compensation for their loss of liberty or impacts on their mental health. A number of the postmasters have agreed to refer this issue to the process of early neutral evaluation to be conducted by former Supreme Court Judge Lord Dyson. It's hoped that this evaluation will facilitate the resolution of those issues, and we stand ready as Government to support the delivery of the early neutral evaluation process and keen to ensure that the outcomes of this process enable swift compensation. So I urge all postmasters with a Horizon-related conviction to continue to come forward to seek to have these overturned. They're being contacted individually by the CCRC and other relevant bodies to encourage them to do so. In addition to the progress and compensation for those with overturned criminal convictions, good progress has been made on delivering compensation for those in the historic shortfall scheme. As of 23rd of June, 65% of eligible claimants have now received an offer, meaning £29 million has now been offered, and that 444 further postmasters have been offered compensation since my last update to the House. And I'd like to thank the independent panels for their diligent work in progressing those cases. As I've said previously, I've set the Post Office the ambition to make 100% of HSS offers by the end of the calendar year, and the Government is working closely with Post Office to achieve this. But as I've said before, it's important, in addition to providing compensation, that we learn lessons so that something similar can never happen again. And that's why the Government set up the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry and put it on a statutory footing to ensure that it has all the powers that it needs to investigate what happened, establish the facts and make recommendations for the future. So we're cooperating fully with the inquiry to ensure that the facts of what happened are established and lessons learned. Mr Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to Shadow Minister Chiomoro.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I'd like to thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement and for keeping the House informed of the progress. The Horizon scandal is perhaps the greatest miscarriage of justice in our country's history, and its victims have long waited for justice, far too long. I want to pay tribute to the tireless work of the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance. And I also want to acknowledge the work of colleagues on all sides of the House who have gone to considerable lengths to highlight the plight of their constituents. And I particularly want to pay tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for North Durham, whose commitment to this cause has been unwavering, and also to Lord Arbuthnot in the other place. And, Mr Speaker, and I do not say this lightly, I would like to pay tribute to the Minister. Successive Conservative governments have sat upon this scandal, but the Minister has made real progress in moving us to a place where we can see that justice is in sight, and I would like to acknowledge that. And to welcome the update on the March announcement that, as we have repeatedly called for, the 505 litigants will receive the compensation payments that they are entitled to. But I do want to emphasise, and I'm sure the Minister would acknowledge this, that it is unacceptable that it has taken so long, when the right course of action was always clear, and really there was no need for victims to have spent so long in limbo. At the core of this unforgivable scandal is the belief that workers were dishonest and technology infallible. Not surprisingly, perhaps, given this government's track record on defending the rights of working people. Decent, honest people have had their lives torn apart, have been put in prison, and then made to wait years for justice. For some, that wait has been too long, and we must not forget those who are not with us and will not see the justice to which they were so entitled. So, as I have done in the Chamber before, I implore the Minister to act quickly and decisively to draw a line under this horrific miscarriage of justice. There can be no further delays in providing the compensation which will help right, or at least go some way to helping to right this wrong. As such, can the Minister provide a timescale for when all compensations will have been made? Will the Minister confirm that the compensation will not affect the Post Office's core funding, day-to-day operation or viability in any way? And I stress, in any way. Given the vital role, as we will all acknowledge, that post offices perform in our communities, it is essential that today's communities do not be made to pay for the unacceptable mistakes of the past. Labour has called for all those involved to be held accountable. So can he update the House on what investigations are ongoing into the role of Fujitsu and others involved in the technology that led to the failure? Finally, Mr. Speaker, the Minister spoke about learning the lessons from this horrific scandal. The government was and remains the only shareholder in the Post Office. The government has a financial responsibility, but it also has a moral responsibility to ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. Thank you.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her kind words, and I totally echo her thanks and congratulations to the Right Honourable Member for North Durham, sorry, and indeed Lord Arbuthnot and Telford, and I see colleagues from behind me as well that have worked on this for so long, so tirelessly, and indeed the Honourable Lady for Motherwell, who oversees the APPG, chairs the APPG for post offices, because it's you cannot listen to those stories and not fail to be moved, and there's always something else that comes out that brings a tear to the eye, that brings anger, frankly, that this has ever been allowed to happen. And so, you know, government is moved to do something about this, but we all are, because it's a human cost. We are humans first, politicians second. Now, the Honourable Lady talked about some of the timing. There is an application for the 555 to fill in, but it would be comparatively simple, and Freeth themselves will be working with each of those members to walk them through that process, because the last thing we want to do is put hurdles in the place. We want to make sure that within a few weeks that we have the money going out the door to them. They need the money now. And similarly, within those few weeks, and parallel, that the compensation scheme has been started. We want informal consultation with the 555 to make sure that they are happy with that scheme as well, that they have faith and confidence that they will get that further delivery of funding. In terms of the HSS, as I said, the historical shortfall scheme, we want that to be wrapped up by the end of the year, to at least make offers to each of the people within that by the end of the year. The overturned criminal convictions, I think we can start moving quickly as soon as we've got the Lord Dyson has responded in his early neutral evaluation, but that really then depends on the flow of cases coming to us by the solicitors that represent them, and I'll be working with Hudgels and other solicitors that represents those groups closely to make sure that's as speedy as possible. I can confirm that it doesn't affect the Post Office's core funding. We want to make sure that the Post Office has a future, but we can't have that future until we've rectified the mistakes of the past. And she talked also about Fujitsu and learning the lessons and holding people to account. Well, the next stage of the statutory inquiry starts this following week, when government, when Post Office, when Fujitsu, indeed others, will be coming in front of Sir Win Williams, and that is what's going to start the process of making sure we know exactly who knew what, who did what, and when.
I'd like to thank the Minister for all his good work in this area, and it's obviously a great day today that he's been able to come to the House and make the statement that he has. I remain deeply concerned about the role of Fujitsu, UKGI and all those who sent ministers to this House, even after the Justice Fraser judgment, to say nothing to see here. Yeah. That was wrong. Now, I know Sir Win Williams is investigating, and as the Minister rightly said, but will he personally commit to ensuring that those individuals are held to account?
I thank my honourable friend and for all the work that she has done, and absolutely I will. What I can't do at this dispatch box at this moment in time, having set up the statutory inquiry, direct Sir Wynne to find any particular areas of findings. It's for him to do. I want to keep him as the independent chair, but absolutely we want to make sure that lessons are learned and that people are genuinely held accountable.
SNP spokesperson Marion Fallows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for both his statement and prior sight of it. And I want to thank all those members of the APPG, and both former and still in this place, because they've been the power behind this. I merely chair it. I came along quite a way into all of this, and I'm grateful for the help I've had. I know the Minister has been diligent in his work leading to today's announcement on interim compensation, which, whilst very welcome, has taken a long time to get here. And I thank the Minister also for the thought that has gone into the administration of this scheme, and welcome the proactive action to be taken in contacting those GLO members who are still yet to receive compensation. Could I ask the Minister, and this is a big ask, I know, if he'll reopen the historic shortfall scheme without a cut-off date as called for by the NFSP, because there's lots still of sub-postmasters who haven't applied for compensation and they are entitled to it. Post office failures go a long way back under Conservative, Labour and Lib Dem ministers, and sub-postmasters still struggle to make a decent living. Can the Minister confirm that this Government will continue to support post offices and sub-postmasters so that they thrive and don't suffer for past grievous mistakes, which are now rightly being dealt with?
I thank the Honourable Lady for all of her work and her statement. And in terms of the historical shortfall scheme, I don't think it's practical to reopen it in full, but there are still cases coming forward, and the Post Office are looking at those on an individual basis, because we want to make sure that we can capture as many people that have been wronged as possible. In terms of remuneration for post offices, postmasters, I talked about the fact that we've got to give post offices a future, and that's right on the back of those people who make post office what it is, those postmasters up and down the country. Remuneration remains a key topic of discussion with Post Office, NFSP and indeed postmasters in general.
David Davis.
Thank you, Speaker. I've watched many ministers at this dispatch box come and do a good job, but it takes a very special minister, I think, to come and take an issue like this to heart and really make it move. And so that minister has. The compensation he talks about is long overdue, particularly for litigants. He knows I represent one of them, and will go a good way, I think, to correcting some of the historic injustices in this sorry case. And I congratulate him on that. I know this is not the end of that tale. But it can't be the end in another way. And we've heard about learning lessons and all of that. This is more than learning lessons. This is a question, a massive question of justice, of people who have covered up, let's not break bones about it, covered up a massive injustice to their own advantage, their own profit, their own pay, their own honours even. And I hope the Minister, I know he can't say what, and I know sub judice issues apply to, but I hope he will keep a very close eye on this and make sure that the people who need to be punished are punished and that justice is done.
Right, well, Fred, for all of the work he does and the conversations that we've had, and absolutely, I should not have to be here making these statements. The taxpayer should not be covering compensation for post office. It is being done because these people have been wronged by people in authority. They've been let down time and time and time again over the 20 years. This is why we now need to get that compensation, get that justice, and get those answers, and be able to draw a line so those people who have been wronged can move on with their lives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate it. The Minister knows that I've got two cases. One is in front of the independent panel advising the historic shortfall scheme. But my other one is a conviction that was overturned by the Criminal Cases Review council, and but the Post Office do not accept that it's a Horizon-related conviction and therefore refusing any form of compensation. Given the comprehensive nature of the failure of Horizon, how, with any confidence, can the Post Office say that? And can the Minister confirm that we will be considering compensation for former postmasters who are in the position of my constituent?
I thank the honourable gentleman, we have discussed this. In terms of the interim payments, it's the interim payments that are, I think, of the concern of his constituent. In terms of compensation, that can go through that process. But if it is not deemed that Horizon was the main driver of that, so the Post Office contested it, then they wouldn't be entitled to the interim payment. But it doesn't stop them from applying for that compensation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And like my right honourable friend for Halton, Price and Howden, can I commend the Minister for his personal dedication to this cause, which is really quite outstanding. And I'm sure that a lot of the postmasters around the country appreciate it. The cost of the settlement he's announced, of course, will fall on the public purse. In due course, it should be possible to seek indemnity in whole or in part from those companies, and I would suggest most notably Fujitsu, who are responsible in whole or in part for this issue. Can my honourable friend say what steps he is taking to ensure that they are made aware that in due course such indemnity will be sought?
I think all parties that are going to be in front of the inquiry will know exactly that point, because I don't want to preempt anything that we may do, but clearly, as he says, that the taxpayer should not have to be footing the bill. But we want to make sure that we get all of the answers first before we take further steps.
Thank
you. Can I thank the Minister for the statement? Can I put on the record my thanks to him as well? Having dealt with numerous ministers over the last 10 plus years on this issue, he's the only one that challenged the system and was able to actually compassionately realise that this was a wrong that needed to be righted. So he should be congratulated and take full credit for that. These interim payments will make a difference, because a lot of these individuals, like Tom Brown, my constituent, have been living in abject poverty for the last few years through no fault of their own. Proud individuals who served their community were ruined by the state. Now, like the Honourable Lady for Telford and the Honourable Right Honourable Member for Oldham and Howden, I'd just like to know what the next process is, because accepting that the compensation scheme is going to be put in place, and I'm pleased that Threaths are involved in that, but it's actually about holding people to account. Because just my layman's looking at some of this, there's been criminal activity involved in some of the decisions taking place in this. When will those individuals face that day of reckoning? I accept you can't speak on it in terms of what's coming out of the public inquiry, but I think it's very important that the government has a strategy for making sure that these individuals not only are identified, but then there's a process to deal with them in the criminal courts.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for all his work and his kind words. It means a lot coming from him, having done so much work in this area. And look, again, it's difficult to. I don't want to preempt the inquiry. However, I know, looking back at the records, the Director of Public Prosecutions were interested in the findings of the Fraser judgment, and indeed there is that is the process for further criminal action should that be deemed appropriate.
Duncan Baker.
Mr. Speaker, I re-echo everything that's been said to the Minister, and I'm not going to go over it again, but he really does deserve the credit that has been given. And of course, absolutely, I say this as a former postmaster, I think the only one in the House, that those who were responsible for this, including Fujitsu and the senior people within the Post Office, have to be held to account. But what I want to say to the postmaster is something, to the Minister is something different now, and that is, please look at the remuneration structure for the existing postmasters out there. We are losing post offices up and down our high streets, in our communities, and the reason we are doing that is because it is unviable sometimes to run a post office just as a standalone unit. And when communities lose them, we are struggling to get them back again. So please, once this horrendous scandal is dealt with, look at remunerating them properly so we can get this great institution back onto our high streets, because, by goodness, we need them.
Thank you, and I thank my honourable friend for coming from experience. And look, we're not waiting until this is over. The Post Office, as they have conversations with sub-postmasters and their representatives all the time about remuneration, part of this is to do with that future of the Post Office that I was talking about. Because some people, postmasters, rely on those extra services to bring in footfall that they can then sell other products in their retail outlets for. Some actually find it too binding, including some of the smaller units in Scotland that the honourable lady will be she's nodding, will be appropriate because it's full of parcels and actually stops them from doing other trading. This is why we need to work together to make sure that we can have that viable approach for the post offices, not just for economic value, but for social value as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I do pay tribute to the Minister for righting this wrong and working to get more and more justice for postmasters. He's aware I have a constituent who has faced hardship now for many, many years, having been a sub-postmaster for around 10 years. Can I press him just slightly on his statement in relation to the 33 postmasters who are no longer with us, 4 of which who took their own lives during and waiting for justice, to ensure that their families, whether they be husbands or wives or indeed their children, get support to receive compensation. There can be never enough compensation for those families, but it would go some way to righting this wrong and ensuring that they do get the justice that they deserve.
Thank the honourable gentleman for that, and please do pass my my condolences to the postmaster that I know he's talking about, with his friends and other people that he's been in contact with who indeed have a family member who's taken their life as a result of this. Indeed, the compensation schemes do all include the estates of the families of the estates of the postmasters that have died, whether it's of natural causes or indeed unfortunately taken their own life.
Sir Robert Bethlen.
Mr. Speaker, and I want to add my tribute to my honourable friend who's working tenaciously on behalf of, as he's just said, not just the living but those who have sadly died. And I think he would agree with me that we can have the fullest confidence in the experienced former High Court Judge Sir Wyn Williams in his independent statutory inquiry. But does he agree with me that would he want that inquiry in particular? Look at the way in which evidence that is the product of information technology, and this is only going to grow as a phenomenon in the years ahead. It is, before it is presented to any court, the subject of its own verification. Because that seems to me, Mr. Speaker, to be at the heart of the problem here, and which was the root of what has been, in terms of its scale, the greatest miscarriage of justice in our English and Welsh legal history.
My honourable friend, and indeed the experience that he brings. And look, Sir Wyn Williams has had to really learn very, very quickly and get in considerable resource because of the technology that's been involved. And it's very easy to baffle people with high tech and say there's nothing to see here, there's absolutely nothing wrong. So it's very, very involved. And indeed, I hope Sir Wyn does get to the bottom of exactly the point that my right honourable friend makes.
Others to go.
Mr. Speaker, can I also add my voice to those saying that the Minister deserves full credit for getting us to this point? The inquiry is, of course, about ensuring accountability for those who have done wrong in the past. But we know already that the heart of this problem was a culture at the top and at the centre of the Post Office, which essentially just did not trust the people at the coalface. If we're to ensure that this never happens again, then we have to know that that culture has changed. So quite apart from the inquiry at the past, is the Minister satisfied that those at the top and the centre of the Post Office now have genuinely got that message about the changed culture?
The right honourable gentleman. Yes, I do. Yes, I absolutely do. I think Nick Reid, as we talked about remuneration, Nick Reid actually brings in a different type of culture, different approach, because he's come from someone that doesn't see post offices just as branches of that central location. He's used to dealing with his previous occupation of supermarkets when they were part of the bigger organisation, and I believe that culture is shifting under Nick Reid's leadership.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I add my congratulations to my honourable friend, not just for the work that he's done on this subject, but also for keeping the House updated and listening to what backbenchers have had to say and then dealing with it. And I would cite, indeed, the fact that he's bringing forward interim payments, which I think was asked for by members during the last statement. Now, sub-postmasters essentially are running small businesses, not only for the benefit of the community, but also for the services provided. Equally, the accounting systems prior to Horizon were chaotic, to put it mildly. So I think I would urge him to make sure that not only is the evidence brought forward on what happened during the scandal of those people being charged with offences which clearly they hadn't actually committed, but also what had gone before that led to this chaos in the first place.
I thank Ronald Friend, and indeed, Sir Wynne will be looking at, in the round at the Horizon scandal, and to see how it's progressed over the 20 years, and indeed the history, which is it's documented in Nick Wallace's work, a Great Post Office Scandal, which is a really comprehensive read. He talked about interim payments. Now, clearly, those interim payments are never going to be enough for people to settle their debts. But it's a first step. This is not the end of the process, but it's a really important step. So I thank my honourable friend for his kind words.
Gareth Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Further to the point that the honourable lady who chairs the all-party group on this issue asked about the scope for extending or for flexibility in the closing dates for the historical shortfall scheme. I have constituents who ran a sub-post office in a nearby borough, had it shut down by the franchise taken away by the post office. At first glance, to me, it looks as though it was Horizon issues that were very much involved. They submitted an application to the historical shortfall scheme, but for a series of reasons, it looks like their application was not received by the post office. If the post office are not willing to consider their case, would the Minister be willing to meet with me to see if together we might persuade them to rethink?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll gladly meet him to look at the case. It's difficult for me to make a judgment here, but I talked about the fact that the Post Office are looking at things in an individual basis, but I'll gladly meet him to talk about his constituents' case.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I add my name to the chorus of praise for the Minister? And could I thank the Shadow Minister for her very generous words to him from the dispatch box? The reality is it has taken far too long to get to this point, and it's not just miscarriages of justice like this, it's also the scandals we've seen in the NHS, where people have to wait so long for governments to finally first admit fault and secondly compensate people. And that's obviously often because they've been badly advised along the way. But given what we've heard from so many people around the chamber today, but that people are old, in their retirement, often still in poverty, and of course, as the Honourable Member for Ogbell said, some of them have died, could I press on him the urgency of continuing his good work, that we get this fully resolved as speedily as possible so that everyone gets both the justice and the compensation they deserve?
I thank my honourable friend for his kind words. And look, receiving these praises is clearly it's great for me, but it's not about me. It's not about me, as he rightly says. It's about making sure. Please do carry on, by the way. But no, look, this is about people who have suffered terribly at the hands of people in authority. Some of whom, as we've heard, have taken their own life. Many have been stigmatised. Many are in debt and in abject poverty. We've got to keep the pace going, not just to get that compensation for them, but to get those lessons learned and hold people to account.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Among other catastrophic and inexcusable failures, this House failed. This House was made to fail in its duty to get to the bottom of this quicker, because somewhere in the machinery of government there was a deliberate and sustained conspiracy to send minister after minister unwittingly to dispatch box to say things that we now know are not true. This House has got to look at that very, very seriously indeed. It cannot be acceptable under any circumstances for this House to be prevented from doing its job by conspirators, whether they're in government or in any outside agency, and I hope the appropriate authorities in the House will look into that very urgently. But can the Minister tell me what further action he proposes to take in forthcoming legislation to widen the circumstances in which directors of companies can be held personally liable as well as corporate liable for serious misconduct in office. And in particular, one of the things that my constituents find very frustrating is that directors of these companies, who at the very least should have known what was going on and did nothing to stop it, were able to walk away and become directors of other companies. They've had 20 years of a good lifestyle that was denied to the victims. If they are called to account, they will get a fair trial that was denied to the victims. Will the Minister look for ways to speed up the process of preventing directors from taking up other highly paid directorships if there are serious questions to be answered about their conduct in office?
The honourable gentleman, and I'm not sure if it's the House authorities, but certainly it is the case that the Wynne-Williams inquiry will see exactly where the failings were, including if there are some by ministers or others who have stood here without fear and favour. In terms of directors, that we've already done a number of issues, a number of measures since I've been a minister, including the Disqualified Directors Act, which allows the Insolvency Service to bring companies back on the books to then take action against the directors there. But we'll always look to make sure that we can have the most robust system to tackle rogue directors.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to firstly thank the Minister for his determination to get this issue sorted for sub-postmasters where other ministers failed. So, with post offices harder and harder to come by in recent years, how does the Government intend to restore confidence so that future potential sub-postmasters are not put off opening a business that is so essential to all our communities?
I thank the honourable lady. We want to make sure that by drawing a line under the historic miscarriage of justice, that scandal there, we can work on the future of post office. Now, in order to do that, we need to make sure we're engaging everybody. Rural, coastal and citywide post offices. How do we get the balance right between the economic value of the post office and the social value of the post office? I'll continue to work with the APPG and members across this House to get that bit right.
And finally, Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, can I very much thank the Minister for who very clearly grasped the core of the issue and got the job done. And I think the unanimous opinion of everyone across this chamber is to thank him very much. I add my thanks as well. I very much welcome the fact that those who missed out on this scheme initially now have the opportunity to apply. So it's good to see fairness and equity being the standard set for those who have passed away. Minister, will the sponsors or the next of kin be eligible to apply?
Indeed, thank you, and thank the honourable gentleman for his kind words. And absolutely, we will be working, or the solicitors will be working with the estates of those postmasters who were subject to overturned convictions or historic shortfall, or indeed the original 555. It's really important that we get that equity that he seeks.
Thank you. We now come to the Select Committee statement. May I remind the House of the procedure, which is that Karen Bradley